Hi, welcome to Pastors Connect. I'm Lisa, and this is my good friend,
Rick.
We're glad to be with you today, and we're actually going to be doing a part 2 with the Pastors Connect from yesterday. If you didn't join in, I talked about having no borders with God. He can have everything. Having our walls up with sin, with the enemy that can't get in. And then knowing where to put our boundaries with people and setting boundaries and reinforcing boundaries. So if you didn't get to watch that, I would encourage you to do so. And last night, I think it was, Rick and I were talking about having holes in our border or in our wall and having other people help us set boundaries and other people that would point out some things that would make us go,
Yes, that was true. When I was first a Christian, I came in with much glory to be obtained. I was not ready made at all. I came in like, I don't know, just came in with a lot of baggage. And one of the things is all my life from a little kid, I was a perpetual liar. And I'd lie about stuff that didn't even matter. Didn't even have to lie about it, but it did. And it was such an ingrained habit, lying, that I never thought about it. And even after I became a Christian, I still continued, not anything important, but just stuff you shouldn't ever lie. But I didn't. It was habit.
Were you embellishing? Did you realize you were lying?
I did, but I thought it was harmless because I don't know. I don't know what I thought. I just knew it wasn't. And I was in a group of men, and I started to tell a story that I knew wasn't true. And a friend of mine, who's still my friend to this day, Jim Otteson, he said to me, in very matter-of-fact terms, he said, "Rick, you know everyone in this room knows you're lying except you." And I don't recommend that as the cure-all, but it was embarrassing and traumatic enough that it was a turnaround point for me. And I realized that I was damaging my testimony. It wasn't harmless. It offended people. It alienated me. I didn't even know I was doing it. I was only 19, 18, something like that. But it was super embarrassing. But more than that, it made me ask myself, why was I doing that at all?
It should be embarrassing if we're lying, especially if as a believer, we're not supposed to lie. That's one of like the 10 big ones.
I know. It's like one of those things, like you get to heaven and it's like, or the judgment day comes and it's like,
liar, pants on fire.
You do know you lied your whole life, right? Yeah, but it wasn't anything important. Who cares if the fish was this big or this big?
So I love that they loved you enough to say, hey, it takes some guts. I mean, some people love correcting other people, but there are others that love you and they know it's good for you to set some boundaries with you and also to help you to set up that wall. Were you able to start telling the truth right away?
Oh, yeah, because everyone knew when that hit the floor, those are the people I was with every day.
Okay.
And so I had to make double sure everything I was saying was factual from then on out because I thought they're going to assume I'm lying if there's any room in this at all. So
yeah.
I had to get in the habit of telling the truth because I knew these people knew that was my problem because it had been spilled right out on the floor. Uh-huh. So I just had to break the habit. It's kind of like stopping smoking. It was really...
Well, I've found with a lot of sin, sometimes we don't see it, sometimes we do. But once someone points it out, it's like, you can get angry or you can say, hey, am I guilty of this? I know that when I discovered that I had pride, no one was more shocked than I was. But everybody knew when I went into the office to talk to Pastor about my new revelation that I had discovered I had pride. He laughed.
I have had so many situations where people have just looked at me and I've said something that I thought was just groundbreaking, earth-shaking, and they looked at me and were like, yeah, duh.
You and I did that not too long ago when you were talking about something. And
Pride. It was pride from the deliverance in Katie's. I said, man, God showed me how proud I was and how I thought I was better than other people. And I said, man, I got to get rid of that. That's ridiculous. And the tell was, believe it or not, if you think you're less than somebody, and this is how I knew, God showed me that if you think you're less than somebody, that means you have to think you're better than someone. Because now you're on the scale. And so I was sharing that with you, and you just went, Brother Rick, you do know you're the only one who didn't know that, right? Sort of like a gentler version of what my friend Jim did.
I remember you were aghast and shocked. You were like, other people know this? And I was like, you didn't hide it very well. And you were so little traumatized that it wasn't hidden.
Thrust through by a friend with a dart.
One of mine was whenever my kids were teenagers. You know, you do a lot of things because you think your culture, it's been okay in your culture to do. But some little girl liked my son or he liked her. And I was kind of getting in the middle of this. You know, whether I don't remember, I was kind of rooting and instigating. And Kim McPeak walked up to me and she's like, I need to talk to you. She said, this right here, you have no business doing that. She said, you are getting involved in something that's going to be disastrous. They don't even need to be thinking like that. And anyway, she went into it and I was like, the light bulb went on and I went, oh my gosh, what if she had never told me? There's so many mothers playing matchmaker and all that kind of stuff. So I gave that up right then.
It goes on everywhere. It goes on in people in jobs, positions in the church, situations even in social groups. It's not even about just boyfriends, girlfriends. It happens everywhere. Mm-hmm. People exceed their control and exceed their boundaries and interfere in other people's lives through management or handling them or dealing with them. And they think they're doing them a favor because they think they know best. Mm-hmm. But the worst part of that is when it goes wrong, it becomes all your fault.
Yeah.
You don't get away with it, especially with your kids. It's like if that goes south, it's going to be your fault. Because
and it did, and it was part of my fault. I had to give that to God to redeem it. So what's the difference between, we're talking about people that see a chink in your armor, they see a hole in your wall, and they bring that to your attention, between that and somebody manipulating and getting in and not minding their own business?
I think when somebody's pointing out something that's wrong and they're trying to help you, they're clear. They're crystal clear. They don't pull any punches. They just tell you exactly. They don't handle you. They don't manage you. They don't try to make a subtle, teachable moment out of it. They don't play around. I think when people have a word from God, they just go, let me tell you. And they tell you. Mm-hmm. And whereas people, when they're trying to meddle where they don't belong, they know they don't belong there. They know they're getting into somebody else's free will. So they just won't they'll put their toe in, they'll put their finger in, they'll touch it, but they won't go for it because in their heart they know that they're just meddling.
Well, I think one of the best things you can do is not come into agreement with someone that is wrong, that don't have their boundaries right, they don't have their wall right. And so oftentimes if somebody complains about someone, you may not join in, but you may not say anything. And here's an example of that. My husband, as you know, he's fabulous. And I do not want to talk bad about my husband. But there is a culture that loves to man bash.
Oh, yeah.
There's a culture that loves, even Christian women who I've heard talking bad about their husband, exposing things that should never be exposed. And so one thing that I do is if somebody comes up and they're telling me how bad he is or whatever, I used to just walk away, but I usually will say something good about my husband, hoping that they'll get the hint, but I refuse to talk about that. Now, oftentimes, if you refuse to get involved, it'll be like, if they are wise at all, it'll be like, maybe I shouldn't be saying this. But there are other people, such as myself, that sometimes you have to be real clear with, and expose that. I remember when I was prideful and didn't know it, and very self-consumed, and when you're looking around a room and you're thinking everyone's rejecting you, you're so self-consumed. Nobody's talking to me. Self-consumed. I
do, and I was struggling with relationships. I was full-time in the ministry. I was about, 29 years old. I've been around a long time, and I thought, I pretty well know what's going on. I know what time it is. But interestingly, I noticed that people were distancing themselves from me. They weren't saying anything, but they were just getting further and further. I was getting invited into less conversations. I was on less committees, less meetings. People just were less inclined to want to hear what I had to add to the conversation at all. And I said, what is going on? And I can't say it was the Lord, but I think it was the Lord. Can't say God just spoke to me, because he didn't. But one day I thought, I'm going to take one of those micro recorders. I'm going to stick it in my pocket. I'm going to turn it on its super long play, so it'll go for those will go for 8 hours if you turn them on and leave them. And I just said, I'm just going to turn this thing on until I forget it's there. And at the end of the day, I'm going to listen to this thing. And I went home and I started listening to myself interact with people, because you don't recognize your own voice when you hear it on a recording. It sounds like someone else.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely mortified. And had become so rude and cold and opinionated and so direct with people for no reason. And it was awful. I classified myself as a first-class jerk. I went, no wonder nobody wants to talk to me. Are you kidding? And it was an eye opener. I was like, doing. And I don't know if everybody else wants to do that or not. It's pretty brutal. That's a pretty extreme measure. But if you do it, it'll open your eyes. You do not know what you sound like to other people.
Dennis has helped me with that some, because I used to be a screamer, and he's never been a screamer. I mean, he's never. A few women can say that man has never said one bad word about me.
Wow.
You won't find anybody who can say he has said a bad word about me. I know that. But he's never called me a name. One time he told me I was acting like my mom. That's the only thing.
Well, I had 2 occasions.
That's not necessarily bad.
Where I had real head-turning moments. One person looked at me and said, you do know that just because you're right doesn't give you the right to be a jerk.
Oh.
And I went,
sting.
Okay, because there was no disputing that. And the other one I got,
every Christian
said, I'm going to give you
heard
a piece of advice. Don't know if you'll take it, but I feel like I have to give it to you. He said, when somebody does something that offends you, don't talk about them being wrong, because that just puts up a wall. That just makes them dig in. He said, what's the real reason you're offended? He said, it has hit you somewhere.
Yeah.
And has hurt your feelings. And he said, from now on, if you be well advised to not tell people what they did wrong, tell people how it made you feel. If somebody has said something that's hurt your feelings, or somebody has said something that made you angry, say specifically, I got to tell you how that makes me feel when you say or do that. Because people are much more empathetic, much more compassionate about hurting somebody else's feelings or putting somebody else in a bad way. But if you just tell them they're wrong, and they may be, they may not be, because see, sometimes it's turned out to be me. But on those rare moments, it's been really about just time to just go, wow, I need to look at that.
Well, when I was yelling, I remember one time he had taken it. I mean, I didn't even know my voice had raised to another level, and I've got a loud voice when I want to have. And he started yelling, and he never yells at me, and he did it purposely. He yelled until I looked at him, and then he calmed his voice down, and he said, that's what you sound like. You're not screaming at me. He set his boundary up. I'm not talking to you when you're screaming at me. That's what you sound like. And I was like, I didn't sound like that. And then he said, he just looked at me. But if we don't have people to put a mirror, or God put a mirror, or you put the thing in your pocket so you could mirror and look how you're doing, how are we ever going to improve? And how are we going to go from glory to glory unless we posture ourselves to have no boundaries with God, every boundary with sin, and then be able to just be teachable and correctable. And
well, I had a struggle with my temper forever because I hadn't been through deliverance. I didn't understand my temper. I didn't know that temper comes from past trauma that is unhealed and undealt with, and you're taking it out on future people. Didn't make any sense to me. I didn't understand that. But I did learn the damage my temper was doing, because I had a position in a church full time where I was serving under a pastor who had a raging out of control temper. Not in the pulpit, but with his staff.
Oh,
he
yeah.
was miserable to his staff. And when he did that, I had to sit under that for like 3 years. And it just made me so abhorrent to people who raise their voice and get loud and get real hard on people and don't, that it actually made me change. I didn't even realize I was doing it. But I thought, at one point I thought, if that's what that looks like, I never want to be like that. And that's exactly where I was when I started.
Okay.
And I was exactly like him. And he even told me when I first took the position, he said, I don't need anybody else in this church yelling at people, so you're not going to do it.
If he knew he was yelling, that's...
He thought there was a culture in that organization that being hard and raising your voice to people was okay if it was justified, meaning they thought it was okay to do it.
Yeah.
And sitting under it, I realized, no, it's never okay. It's never okay at all. Somebody said to me one time, they said, you're so careful and you're so gentle with people and you're so, and it was the biggest compliment anybody could have ever paid me. And I said, yeah, there's a whole line of dead bodies for that lesson. There's a lot of people paid the price for me to arrive at whatever you think is gentle and nice.
Now, I want to dive into something real quick. One thing you're really good at is something that I've been talking about with the last two segments, is being able to kindly put a boundary up with what people speak to you. Somebody's complaining to you. Someone's sharing information about a brother or sister they shouldn't. I've seen you be consistent in setting that boundary. I want to know how you do that, what your thought processes are on that, how you would tell people, because it takes some character, some strength of will to stand up and speak when you may get rejected. Not everyone's happy to get the truth.
Well, I learned from a friend of mine was getting her PhD in counseling, or not PhD, I'm sorry, her master's degree in counseling and Christian counseling. And she used to always ask me to help her with her homework because she didn't read all that well. So I had to read a bunch of her books to help her get through some of her classes. It wasn't a lot, but it was just enough that I got sort of an understanding. And one of the things I learned from her education is that you can give an hour of advice and it won't mean a thing compared to one really well-placed anointed question. And one of the questions I ask people when I get information I didn't really want to know is I've done this. You can do this as direct as you have to, depending on the personality you're up against. Mm-hmm. But I'll ask them a question. I'll go, what did I do or say that made you think that I wanted to know that? Because they have to answer that question or at least walk away with it on their mind. And it's the roughest thing I do to people. But if I do that, there's no doubt that I didn't want to hear that. But it doesn't take it on. It doesn't put it. It's not the you're wrong situation. Mm-hmm. I did something, and sometimes it's really true. It's not a move or a handling. I really want to know, did I do or say something that made you think it was okay to share that with me or to talk to me about that? Because whatever it is, I want to know about it because I don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the other one is the same thing you already mentioned, is the minute somebody starts talking bad about somebody, I just start countering with the nice stuff about them. Because everybody's got some nice and some not so nice. And if somebody just wants to, a pastor friend of mine, when I was going through some difficult times, he talked about how the big picture of your life is something you can back up and look at and get control of things. And I went, no, I'm in a lot of pain right now, and I don't really want to hear that. You're going to have to give me that in some really deep detail for me to accept that, because that's just too simple of an answer. And he said, imagine you're looking at a giant tapestry or a picture of something, and it's full of good and bad, mm-hmm. and you're nose to the wall, 6 inches away from a bad part of it. And it's all you can see is the bad. You can't see anything else. He said, but if you just start backing up and distancing yourself from it and thinking about everything else that's in that picture, which our lives are like that big tapestry, he said, you'll find so much. Because I always was hard on myself. I've been so bad in my past. I didn't do these things right. I didn't do that right. I didn't do that right. One day he said to me, you don't act like that now. And I went, no, I don't. And he goes, well, do you want to have a perfect past? Because I know how to make a perfect past. You want a perfect past? I went, absolutely, yeah, but I'm thinking excuse me, I'm sorry about this. I should have turned this off. I said, absolutely, yes. But I can't, what's the hook, And he said, get up tomorrow and have a perfect day. And now you have the first day of your perfect past. Mm-hmm. And don't think about any other days but those. And he was really good. He was really a mentor to me about handling people who are dealing with pain. He was really good at it. Mm. But
that's good wise counsel.
I've had some good counselors along the way.
Mm-hmm. Me too. And the thing is that they don't have to speak a lot to make it memorable. I was talking about how I was turning everything in to be about me, and I was headed up to the stage to sing in a choir, and I told Lisa Thresher, because I was just feeling vulnerable that morning, and Lisa had spoken so much truth into my life, and she's like, are you okay? I was like, yeah, I just don't want anybody looking at me. And she went, really? I don't remember exactly how she said it, but it was something like, so there's about 200 people in the room. Out of all 200 people, what about you makes you think that everybody is going to be looking at you? And I was like, well, no, that's not it. That was exactly it. Because I was so important. People are obsessed with me that they're coming to worship God, but looking at me. And I was like, oh my gosh. She just had that knack, that wisdom, that anointing to hone in on the area in my life, the hole in my wall where I was allowing rejection, fear of rejection to come in and to mutilate my joy. And I couldn't worship God when I was consumed with me.
I had a counselor friend who worked with people who had severe behavioral problems, and they were in ministry or working in situations where it was unacceptable, and they were seeking counsel to get out of their issues. And he asked me to help him with that program, and I did. But I was being played because he was ministering to me big time. And I would say things to him, and he would respond with his favorite question. 2 favorite questions were, why did you say that? And he would go silent. He's just waiting for the answer. He wasn't going to tell you why he asked the question or anything. He'd just say, why did you say that? And his other favorite question is, when that happened, where was Jesus? And he'd add to that one, because sometimes he'd mock me because he knew I knew the answer. He'd say, did he run out to get a Coke and fries and left it to one of the angels and came in and went, what did you do? He said, what happened there? Did he fall asleep at the stick? What went on there? Where was he? And of course, we all know that he's always there. And it was he had just this great way of asking questions.
Amber, she has a couple of those. She's a therapist, but she's also in our freedom ministry, and she will say, if I say something, she'll say, have you prayed about that? Or she'll say, I think you may need to think on that for a little bit longer. And that just gives me, she's not rejecting me. It gives me a little bit of time to go, okay, what part of this does she think I need to rethink? It doesn't hurt to rethink it. We need those kind of people in our lives.
It helps to know your good friend's tells.
Yeah.
When they're disagreeing with you, it helps. It helps because Lisa's got a meter in her facial expressions, and it goes approve, disapprove, approve.
Don't
disapprove.
tell them what it is.
I'm not.
You know what?
I'm not going to out you, but I'm just saying.
You did that. You told somebody one time, and they told me something ridiculous, and they looked at me and they said, Rick is right. You don't agree with me right now. Because I don't always say it because I could be wrong, or I may want to pray about it. Maybe I don't have the right to speak into somebody's life. But he was like, he's right. And I was like, oh, you're right.
Yeah.
What he just told me was really dumb. So don't tell people my secrets.
I will not tell it anymore. Now that I know I let it out once, I won't do it again.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
But we all have it. It's just, you just got to look for it. Everyone's got it. When people don't agree with you, if you just pay attention, you don't have to wait until they get mad or they go off or they tell someone else. Yeah. You can handle it right on the spot if you're just sensitive.
Well, when we first became friends, you were kind of shocked that even though I disagreed, I didn't always say it.
No, I'm used to people being very disagreeable when they disagree.
I've been wrong too many times, so I have to go check to make sure that I'm correct. Not that I don't speak out of turn on the occasion. Did you have any scripture or anything you wanted to share before we wrap this up?
Well, the one thing that I really was reading was in Colossians in 3, and it says, talking about putting away the flesh, and there's quite a bit there, but 9 stuck out to me. It said, probably 8. Talking about that fleshly things, he said, for which things' sake the wrath of God cometh on the children of disobedience, in which ye also walked sometime when you lived in them. And the point that I got was, but now you also put off all these, anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. And it says, lie not one to another, seeing that you have put off the old man with his deeds, and have put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge after the image of him that created him. And I thought about lying not one to another, because you put off the old man. And sometimes people, I have been guilty of, and I've had to really repent of it, but sometimes not necessarily in overt Big Ten things in the Bible, but they just walk into their closet and they just pull the old man off the hanger, and put it on, and they go somewhere, and they are the old man, and then they'll come back home and they'll put it back on the hanger and put back on their Christian suit and go to church. And I'm just like, and it's lying isn't necessarily when you just say something you know is not true. I think that we lie with our behavior because we act in manners with the intent to cause somebody to believe something about us that's not true or about others. And so maybe it falls under just deceitfulness more than lie, but it feels like the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I had.
That's good. Now this Wednesday, everything we're talking about is going to feed into my talk on murder. I talked about sin, transgressions, and iniquity.